maybe.
Yeah. Very good. So tonight we're going to be kind of focused on two areas. One are the city-owned properties that are at 1081 and 1091 Pioneer Way by Midway Boulevard. And the other is the approximately 600-acre waterfront district. I'll be going over some basic updates on our ecology grant that are part of this process, as well as the long-term planning. And then we have with us Norman Wright, who's with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and he's online, and he's going to be talking about next steps, which include an economic market analysis and 3 public workshops. Tonight, there's really 4 key takeaways. The first is that Oak Harbor community has long planned for, financed, and been involved with and prioritized a redevelopment of the downtown. It's been going on for decades. And so we're here tonight to really continue that journey of this community. Number 2, the city properties on Pioneer Way that we purchased, we did our due diligence. We know that they were contaminated with petroleum contamination. And so as part of our grant program, we've been looking at that with further investigation. So tonight we'll just be giving you a very brief update of both the groundwater and the soil contamination. In your report is a very lengthy report. I'm available to talk about any details that you want to. But tonight I'll be going over it very briefly and just giving you the executive summary. And number 3, I just wanted to read this out loud because I think this is really important to understand where we are in this process. 3rd, Mayor Wright and our City Council, as part of the recently adopted budget, have begun a successful redevelopment process. In 2023, we warned council members and the public that the city was in a state of infrastructure emergency. Much of the city's development took place following World War II, making the oldest infrastructure several decades old. Buildings, utilities, and roads in the oldest part of Oak Harbor were nearing the end of their useful life. We detailed how the city's water mains, sewer lines, storm drains, streets, sidewalks, and structures were in a, quote, severe state of decay. We discussed how the city must partner with our private businesses and landowners to redevelop for the future, especially our city center. You and the city's community leaders have faced this challenge. And a successful course of action is now in place now that you have adopted the 2026 budget. So thank you. And so where do we go from here? Number 4, the key thing you're going to be hearing over and over in this coming year is we need to make some very critical changes to our code, to update that code to be able to move forward. And that is the critical path that you're going to face, and they'll be coming back to the Planning Commission, and we'll be coming back to you in the months ahead. All right, very briefly, we had our 1999 Harbor Watch. That was a big plan produced, and again, all these are available to the public and others if they want to look at it. When I analyzed that, a lot of that was proposed new pavement right in our downtown. Probably made sense in the 1990s. There was the 2000 Harbor Pride, which again, very encompassing report. There's a 2005 Waterfront Redevelopment and Branding report, again, very encompassing, a lot of changes, and so on and so on. And the key thing we want to emphasize tonight that each of these had federal grants, state grants, local financing, strong community support. Where we are today is we have a integrated planning grant through our Washington State Department of Ecology, and that's for $200,000, and that requires zero match. We also have the Center for Creative Land Recycling, who are providing $100,000 in scope as part of this project, and with that, we provided them $10,000. So a total of $300,000 of effort, of which 96% of it is covered by federal, state, and nonprofit funding. So this has been a very exciting process to move forward. Now, just briefly, I'm going to go over this very large, encompassing report, and I only have 3 slides, but please ask any questions. So we know when we did our due diligence, we had data from 2021, and what they do is they didn't put any monitoring wells in. What the hydrogeologist explained to us is hydrogeologist explained to me is they do a boring and they kind of pull up the soil and the groundwater kind of in kind of a combined sample. So it tends to overestimate the contamination that might be in the groundwater, which is a good thing. If you're a potential buyer, you kind of want to know what the worst case scenario was. And so we have data from 2021, and if you look closely at the report, you can see all those yellow highlighted areas. Those show areas that are above what the state's standard is, what is called MTCA, MTCA. And so you can see 2024, you can see groundwater. We have no yellow highlighted areas. So in our first round of sampling, where we put in 5 new monitoring wells this summer, we went out in November and sampled those, and we have no contaminants above any state standard. So that's, yes, much better than our pro forma, which was what you want to see, right? And so that's good news. Now, as part of our ecology grant, we must do 3 more rounds of sampling. Now, I don't have the sampling of our latest round, which was just done last month, but our consultants have told us that that is looking good. They're still going through that data, still getting it from the labs, but it is also looking good. So our groundwater at this stage is looking in a good situation. We won't take our last and 4th groundwater sampling until June of this year. All right, now to soil. There are 2 areas of soil contamination. Mostly it looks like it's related to petroleum contamination, and that's no surprise since this was a former gas station. So everything's kind of lining up with what we saw before and what we're expecting. So here's the results from one soil area about 10 feet below ground. Here's the results from the second area, again, also about 10 feet underground. And here is a map of that area. So you can see I got Midway Boulevard on the top part of this graph and Pioneer on the left. You can see the yellow highlighted area, which is by what some people call the old tattoo building. That is 10 feet below that is where we see some petroleum contamination in the soil. And then, and then you can see it's very small, but you can see a purple area kind of in the lower left-hand side of this drawing, just off the former gas station building. And that is also about 10 feet below ground, shows some soil contamination. So again, nothing surprising. What we are working with ecology right now is, in our official documents, is to propose that when we do a redevelopment of the site, we are almost sure that all of this soil is getting removed as part of putting in a proper foundation, putting in probably some piers. A lot of this is on unconsolidated soil that was dredged material that was brought in to fill the old water lagoon that many of you might have seen the aerials on. So we know we're going to be removing this soil. So at that time, while we're removing all the clean soil, we can really get in there and focus and take the contaminated soil to another location. So that is going to what we will be working with ecology on in the coming months. All right, now to the integrated planning portion of this. So what's really nice is both our Washington State Department of Ecology and our U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as part of these brownfield grants, which is the generic name for those, they not only want you to address the contamination, but they want these communities to be able to redevelop these sites. A lot of these sites are in core city areas that have been contaminated over the years, and they want to see them redeveloped and reused for the community. So we've identified at least 7 areas that are going to be important for the Planning Commission, city staff, the council, and the community to really focus on, and there'll be more that'll come up. But one, we want to take a look at the 5-story building zone. Right now, most of this area is zoned for 5 stories or 55-foot heights. And generally the feedback up to date is we want to keep that kind of village level. We don't want to go mid-rise necessarily in all the areas. But we want to take a close look at that, at what that really means and what that means for moving forward. And there's a lot of different opinions, and we're going to have our economic report that's going to come forward, and you're going to see a lot of data on what their proposals are. So that's a key thing moving forward. Another key area, which we've talked about before at council meetings, is the city parking requirement. That is going to be very key moving forward. And a lot of cities are removing their minimum parking requirements. They are like, why is the government in today's day and age trying to regulate minimum parking? Why are we taking that away from private developers and trying to control that? There's a lot of moving pieces in that area. There's a lot of different decisions that are being made. So that's going to be a key requirement if you're going to move forward. If that still stays the 1960s, let's call it, parking requirement, then probably you're not going to see a lot of redevelopment. It's just that, I just want to be able to state that up front so that you're just kind of aware of that and can work through that. So again, if we kind of keep these 1960 parking requirements, you're not going to see a lot of redevelopment, at least it doesn't appear so, for quite some time. You'll see some small changes, but you won't see anything dramatic, and certainly nothing that's going to help me rebuild your infrastructure. If anything, it's going to be very costly, very timely. We'll get some revenue out of it, but it really won't move the ball, and your infrastructure will continue to decay, and you'll get to a point where there's very little chance for you to return from that. So this is very serious stuff. I really see this as a way of the city over the next decade really deciding how you want to move this redevelopment forward, because there's a lot of positives to it: new housing, new jobs, new economic opportunities. But I'm telling you, as a public works director, we need this to be able to redevelop the infrastructure that's there now after decades of misinvestment, malinvestment, zero investment, that now is caught up with us, and we need to figure out a way to finance it. And we're not going to do that through grants and our own local utility taxes. We've got to find another partner to move this forward. So number 3, that public and retail connection to the waterfront is key. Right now, we don't have that in our code, really. It faces Pioneer, which kind of made sense when it was kind of smelly lumber mills and fish factories on the water. You didn't want to look toward the water necessarily. But that's different nowadays. We have this golden gem, and our code doesn't really address how we imagine when we redevelop how important it'll be to make sure that we have a waterfront-facing code. Number 4 is the existing rock seawall and our future shoreline. And this is something that a college is looking at very closely. We have a rock seawall, a hardened seawall in today's world, which is generally not allowed to be putting in new ones. And so there's a lot of things we need to focus on, how that will affect how much land we have, how we can soften that seawall in the future. That'll be very critical, and again, that's going to take investment. Number 5 are building design standards. We want this. All of us want it to be beautiful. We all want to be proud of the new buildings that get built. We need to put a lot of effort into what the design standard is and what that means for our community. Number 6, our street standard and how we have a good transportation network. And lastly, because this is approximately 600 acres, there is a lot of synergy that can be developed by doing this as collectively as a whole. It's not just the one individual parcel we own, it's part of this collective parcel that creates tremendous synergy that you see at our neighboring jurisdictions. Once that gets going, it really creates a lot of value. All right, here is the waterfront district map, and so I'm just going to kind of show you, here's our city limits. You can see SR 20 here in purple. You can see Midway Boulevard here in blue. And then the harbor and waterfront is to the south, to the bottom of this map. And so generally in red here is what we are calling the waterfront district. And so this is approximately 600 acres. And again, the exact definition of this has not been defined. You've seen maps of this triangle before, and we've been discussing it with planning. And there's various maps, but none of them have been adopted. But as part of this process, we'll bring further definition to that. But here's the general area we're talking about, and here's the critical piece. This is where most of our oldest infrastructure tends to be. This is the part that needs the most help from a public works standpoint. As I have told you before here, I would not be surprised if someone comes out, if we have no water to many, many blocks in this area. We have lines that literally, I just heard from Chris Price today, they are out there, and this steel water line is just popping holes in it as they're watching it. It's that thin, it's that aged, and it's all over the place. All right, as part of this process, we want to be able to develop some renderings, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight, but this will be part of the public workshops that Norman Wright is going to speak of right after my presentation. And so here's an example that we wanted to capture those 7 items that we talked about and be able to give a visual, so when the community comes to these meetings, they have something to respond to. It's not just words. They can feel it, they can see it, they can sense it. And so this is Bayshore Drive and Midway Boulevard, and this is looking west. I'm sorry, Brian, we didn't get the angel of creativity in this rendering. We had started drafting this before that was done, but that should be in here. And so it's off just past that sailboat. And I like that our renders on the Oak Harbor Sailing Club, they put the number 24 because that's when we started working on this. So we'll always remember what year we did this rendering. And so you can see we're trying to show a softened shoreline. We're trying to show 5 stories. But what if you want to provide some architectural detailing and do a 6th story on the corner to provide something that's more visually appealing? This is during an event that would be happening. How do you connect to the waterfront during those events? How do these new buildings, wouldn't you want restaurants and public spaces and retail to be able to connect to the events that happen on Bayshore? We're trying to capture all those ideas, and I'm going to stop talking because really it's going to be Norman Wright and others that are really partnering with us, and Maggie and Sabrina, who are going to help unfold these ideas for the community and for us. Here's a second rendering. This is looking at Pioneer Way and Midway Boulevard intersection. So right now you'd see the old tattoo building and the old gas station if you're looking at this. And so here's what, again, a 5-story building would look like. But again, you only see 4 stories because the 5th story is below ground from the Pioneer Way. And again, we tried to show something on the corner to say, what if you wanted to go above that 50-foot height purely for architectural reasons, to provide some architectural interest. And again, we tried to show some Navy jets here, and our American flag, and our firefighters' plaque, and some other things so that people can really relate to where they are. Part of the ecology grant provided us $20,000 for staff time, and I want to thank Wendy working with me on this. In the first 3 quarters from January to September 2024, we've been able to get reimbursed $11,700 already. So in essence, through this grant, you've already made $1,700 if nothing else happens. You know, if you want to just think it from a cash flow standpoint, David, we've brought in more money than we've spent. So that's right. Can you look at it that way? Okay, he said no, but I tried. The existing 2 buildings, the grant paid for hazardous material investigation. We discovered that there was asbestos. The city removed the asbestos in 2024. That was not funded through the grant, so the city provided that funding, just like we did with the Ireland house that was below City Hall, or for the house that was going to be at our future fire station. We did put rental fencing up, and we're paying for that each month just because we were seeing people breaking in. The building now more and more is becoming a hazard. When they removed the asbestos, a lot of that was in the roof, and so there's even less strength in the gas station building than there was before, and I already can see additional cracks happening in the canopy. And so we are proposing to demolish both buildings. We have worked with the ecology on the shoreline rules. We've worked with the state, the Archaeological and Historic Preservation Board on that, and so we'll be issuing a SEPA so the public can comment on that and give us their feedback on that, and that'll be coming out shortly. We've already got that into our development services group, and so that'll come out, and then I know Maggie and Sabrina are going to work to make sure we get Facebook posts out on that too, so that people will have an opportunity to provide us their comments. All right, and we're already trying to find ways that we could recognize our history. So on one of the best things about the gas station building is that beautiful octopus rendering. So if you squint and look at one of our new renderings, you'll see on the new concept wall is an octopus. So the octopus lives, and it will have a future life, is what we hope. All right, lastly, from my part, we need to look at these as we've had 100 years, let's call it, of city history here in Oak Harbor, right? They built the Deception Pass Bridge that changed everything in the 1930s. We'll be celebrating, won't be too long, we'll celebrate the 100th anniversary of the building of the Deception Pass Bridge. And so for the next 100 years, 2027 to 2127, what is Oak Harbor going to be like? Now, I know David Kuhl and his amazing staff are doing a 20-year plan right now, but when we put in the water line, we want that water line to last 100 years. That's our goal. We don't want to come back 21 years later and find out we were wrong. So we're going to be planning, as part of the work that Public Works is going to be doing, we're going to be redoing our sewer comprehensive plan, our water comprehensive plan, our transportation comprehensive, our stormwater comprehensive plan. All those are with the goal of having that infrastructure last 100 years. So we're going to visualize even beyond your current comp plan. And so here is the Cascadia area, at least the northern portion of it, from Olympia up to Vancouver area, and this is often called the Cascadia mega region. Again, would be you'd love to live in this country. It'd be very rich. If you just lived in this country, you would have a great GDP. And Seattle in the middle. All right, and here is Oak Harbor, right there in that bright spot that you can see at night. And so what are the key things? The Growth Management Act really has two beginning things. One is that to encourage our development in the urban areas. And number two is to reduce sprawl and conversion of undeveloped lands into low-density development. And right, that's what you've been hearing, and that's what you're going to continue to hear. And so you can see in this nighttime map that there's not that many areas. You can see south of Oak Harbor, as you enter onto Whidbey Island, it turns dark. You can't even really see the island on this. And so the goal of that is to keep those areas rural. And you can see there's an area between Burlington and Bellingham that's also dark and rural. There was a proposed new city that was going to go there that Skagit County was looking at, right? And that is no longer the case. That is no longer going to be part of their current comp plan. And so part of that is because people wanted to keep that area rural. So really what a lot of this comes down to is how do we preserve our farms and forests? And what does that mean for us over the next 100 years? If this is Cascadia now, what will Cascadia look like in the decades to come? And then this is, to me, is very fascinating. This tells the story of what has happened just over the last 20 years in the Puget Sound region. Not Island County, but this is the Puget Sound Regional Council. This is King, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap counties. This would be what we'd call our core urban area. You can see the annual housing production. The purple is the single family. The red, I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. The purple is the multifamily. The orange or red is single family, and then the, I guess you'd call it yellowish green, is mobile homes. So you can see mobile homes has almost disappeared to nothing. You can't even see it in the last decade. Single family has dropped almost in half, our single family production. And I tell you, with the developers that I am speaking with, they are already looking at the end of single family plats in the Western Washington in the coming decades. That there will not be any new single-family plats. They're already counting where the last one's going to be. Is it going to be in Oak Harbor or is it going to be in Gig Harbor? And what year is that going to be? And so that's the city that we are living in. That is the economic heartbeat that beats, and that, you know, we see those tourists come through our area, and that's who we're trying to attract to the island. You can see what happened with multifamily with the purple. It has exploded. And so that multifamily is taking off and continuing. So nobody knows what the next 20 years would look like, but this is an unbelievable transformation, what has happened just in the last 20 years. And a different type of city that we are going to be living in and managing. City, you know, in this Cascadia region. And so here's just the trend lines. And now we're going to hear from Norman Wright, who's online. And Norman, you still there?
Yeah, still here, Steve. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay. All right, great. Nice to meet you, everyone, council members at the City of Oak Harbor. My name is Norman Wright, and as Steve said, I'm going to be your consultant for the Center for Creative Land Recycling. As I begin, I want to say it's been a genuine pleasure already to work with your team, and we're making great progress on the project that we refer to on our consulting team side as a vision to action process for this waterfront district. That's how we describe a community engagement effort that embodies the steps that you see here on the screen right now, the 3 public workshops and the economic analysis that we'll be doing. As I start to describe those a little further for you, I want to also take a moment to review what Steve has already shown. In those earlier slides, he showed a vision for the waterfront dating back to 2000, a redevelopment and a branding effort that took place in 2005. He also showed the concept design for this catalytic development on the existing brownfield at Bayshore Drive and Pioneer Way. And showing those multi-story buildings also shows this prevailing trend of residential construction that is seeing multifamily housing increasing in its volume and total share, while single family is a lesser share of the housing stock over time. All of
Mr.
this is
Wright,
a result.
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to we're not seeing anything happening on our screen. Are you just referencing the past slides, or are we supposed to be seeing something happen?
Oh yeah, great point. Yeah, I on my slide on my screen I see the slides
Oh.
available for me, but are you not able to see your slides? Or the same slides, I should say. On the Microsoft
No,
Teams.
we had the next steps slide up, and then now we have a public workshops slide up. Is that?
Great. Yes,
Okay.
that'll be just fine.
Okay.
Yes, so long as you all have that, I see it too, and so we're in sync then. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to disrupt your flow. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I was just saying that all of this continued growth and urbanization of your island community creates, something very exciting for the future. But of course, it comes with some definite concerns that the community is going to share. So on the screen right now, you should see where the first two workshops are outlined. So all the growth that's going to be projected over the next 20 years or 100 years, as Steve was mentioning, that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen as precisely as people predict, and it certainly doesn't happen to everyone's satisfaction. And so in our workshops, we're going to try to talk with the community about the tension that many people feel over this oncoming growth and this amount of change. So we're going to start with the general information sharing about where we are today with all the things that Steve just shared in the information just now. We're going to start to find out more about where we're going based on the projections of the comprehensive plan and the housing needs analysis that's been done. And then we're going to talk about the needs and preferences for how those things manifest in new development along the waterfront. This is where there's no wrong answers, and the community can care very loudly in these workshops about what they want to see specifically around these somewhat vague notions. So in the workshop number one, we'll get that information sharing going, and then we come to workshop number two. And this is where we go from the broader concepts to something very specific like the renderings that Steve shared. And also we start to talk about scenarios for the future and what is expected to occur. So I want to jump to the next slide if we can. And hopefully that next slide, as it pops up, you'll see a scenario model there. And so this particular model is an example of work that I'm currently doing for the city and county of Honolulu, Hawaii. There, they are expecting similar intensification of their suburban areas around a rail line. And so they need transit-oriented development that's going to be much more vertical, much more intense, and they want to really understand the impacts to the community based, again, on what they prefer, what they're expecting, what they're thinking and feeling, as well as the measurables to, say, greenhouse gas emissions or water usage, for that matter. So we will develop for our second workshop some very detailed models that give a clearer sense of what the vision for this area entails to go along with the 2D renderings that Steve has shown earlier. And again, give people more of that clearer idea so that they can react with the priorities and the problem solving that can help make this type of development feel more palatable and more true to the character of the area as they value it today. From there, on the next slide, we should be able to see the next part of this service. So as we're getting more and more detail into the vision, we're going to also start to examine the economic components that would make that vision a reality. The most important question here is just that. How do we make this vision a reality? As people tell us what they want to see and some of the vision gets adjusted accordingly, those barriers to investment are going to be very important to address. And so our partners at Cascadia Partners, which is a consulting firm out of Portland, Oregon, will be employed here to help us really analyze and not only the economic conditions from a data-driven standpoint, but by also talking with local developers in the area to get the quantitative and qualitative look at just what, again, are these barriers that stand in the way of these sites being developed according to the vision. As they start to do that analysis, we will then come back with our next slide to our third workshop. And so in the next slide here, we will share workshop number 3, where we will have our refinements to the vision itself based on whatever are those key areas of concern that are operationally feasible to be addressed or can be addressed through policy actions in tandem with the comprehensive plan. We'll then bring forward the market feasibility analysis from Cascadia Partners to show where those economic barriers are and provide a strategy to overcome those. And then we'll have the final takeaways in that third workshop so that people can really see the implementation roadmap to bring these things about, so that that brownfield that's there on Pioneer Way can be converted into something much more promising, much more lasting, and much more fitting to the vision that's been in place since 2000. So I'm giving you a nutshell version of what will occur between February and May. So we'll have many months together and 3 key workshops in which all of these conversations will occur. And with that, happy to answer any questions and toss it back to Steve. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And so tonight is discussion only. We wanted to provide an update to council and to the community, and we want you to see what next steps are going to be before we have these public workshops. So any questions for Mr. Wright or myself?
Thank you, Mr. Schuler. Nothing fuels my existential dread like infrastructure discussions, for sure. Before I turn to council, are there any comments, questions, reactions from the public? We just our first look. Go ahead, Mr. Gluth. Please go to the podium, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
I'm Brad Gluth. I'm with Corridors Ventures, LLC. We own over 3 acres of the waterfront, including the Alfie's building, where we have development plans being developed right now. I'm very concerned about this lack of parking, this discussion and the renderings. If there's no parking for hundreds of units of residential and these businesses, it's going to ruin the surrounding area. There's not enough parking now at times. They're going to be parked up Jensen Street, Midway. They're going to be parked on private properties, blocking driveways. At events, my wife and I who live on Jensen Street, we have people block our driveway to go to events because there's not enough parking. I'm very interested in being invited to the workshops and notified of when they're going to occur so I can participate. We are hoping to build a lot of residential down there. Retail has been a lot of discussion with us that retail is underdeveloped on Pioneer Way, and for new retail to compete with cost per square foot rentage, it's very difficult for new retail to be able to rent. From many discussions with the professionals that have been helping me in cost analysis. So doubling or tripling requirement for retail, I think it's cost prohibitive to develop, because you can rent housing, you can rent a condo or an apartment, but renting all this new retail is desired from discussion with staff. It's something we'll have to subsidize, and we have to figure out how we can actually fund a project if a wish list is developed for pie in the sky development. I think a no parking allowance here is it doesn't fit our city. We're not King County, we're not Pierce County. Those people down there dream of living here. I've talked to people who live there, and the cost of living down, the cost of parking to pay for it, because there's a lack of it. I've talked to people who basically people park three blocks over in front of somebody else's place and take it up. So I don't agree with that concept. I don't think it's going to help the downtown businesses. I don't think it'll help the residents who want a nice little town. This is not New York. It never will be. And there's a reason people live on Whidbey. In addition, we're a military town. I work on the base now. I worked here for 17.5 years. I helped with parking requirements. I helped write codes, an architect of different sections of code for land use. I would argue the Growth Management Act is one of the reasons why housing is so expensive. I remember when it came in '97, it's locked up a lot of land, and in the industry, there's a lot more discussion about how the big correlation between the GMA and the cost of housing. That GMA may have to change, and a lot of professionals are talking about that it's very restrictive. And when we also put in a lot of new environmental regulations, it upped the cost of housing dramatically. So I would very much like to be invited to the meetings. I'd like to participate. Right now, we are the developers for over 3 acres down there. We think our product that we're envisioning, in fact, I have a meeting with our architects tomorrow. I think it would be a very nice addition to the city, provide a lot of housing, and we're trying to do it where it will be affordable for us, a nice product, and affordable for people to rent. We're not going to see people pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month down there for rent. So the product has to be affordable. And that's something the city in this process needs to take into account. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glue. Any other feedback from the public after our first looks at the, I don't know, concept? All right, I'll turn to council. Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you. Mr. Schuler, I just have a question. The property across from the city property, the waterfront property where the riprap currently is, the hard wall, the city owns that, right?
Explain to me again, you're saying on the
Other
water
Other
side?
side of Bay Shore Drive, at the
Actual shoreline?
yeah, the
Yeah,
actual
the-
shoreline.
The actual
actual shoreline,
tidelands?
tidelands.
Yeah. You know, I think I can't speak to that as with any kind of expertise, so we would need to get some, I know that that was part of our due diligence, and I would refer to others that would tell you exactly
Yeah, it seems,
what we own.
It seems to me as though we looked at that and there was, and I think it needs to come into this discussion, right? I guess is what I'm doing. You're asking for early input, right, rather than input after you've created a plan and then somebody comes along like me with a crazy idea. But I think in our initial look, that was originally part of that property, and Bay Shore Drive divided it, and so there may be, some understanding that the city owns that title. Because I quite frankly love, the initial concept, but I think we can go further. And I think, a lot of the plans that we've initiated in the past, we haven't been able to follow through on because they were either too short visioned or it was too small of a project for it to be a big project, right? It was like this kind of mini project, right? And then we end up piecemealing it, right? And things then just kind of fall apart. You talk about softening that shoreline, which, is something that, we continue to see conversations about with seawater rise and all the climate stuff we got going on. And of course, we have several studies looking at our shoreline and how we're going to deal with that. And I'm just wondering if, my vision, and I think I shared this with you once before, if whether or not a waterfront promenade over that waterfront, I look at communities like, I just came back from Ketchikan, Alaska, that entire waterfront is built on wooden piers. There's shopping and there's restaurants and there's, boating activities and marinas and just all sorts of stuff connected with those wooden piers. And I'm just thinking from a standpoint of I'm not an ecologist or an engineer, but, I've seen several pier projects where those piers have been used for that softening, right? So rather than just planting a grassy area or planting some weeds between a bunch of rocks and saying, okay, we've softened it, that's actually been softened with something that becomes a usable entity. And, if you can just picture, walking out of that, those buildings there on that corner and walking across to, a wooden pier or promenade that then takes you down to the mini harbor instead of approaching through Flintstone Dock and stuff, right? And again, if we own it and we don't claim it, I've seen this transition over years, right, where it's been really clear that this property's here, it belongs to the city, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't. I think we ran into that with our outfall, right, that had been there on Pioneer Way for, 80 or 90 years, and then all of a sudden we went from having property that we owned to, that outfall is actually 4 feet out of, there's all sorts of crazy stuff. So, yeah, so I just want to make sure that in this conversation, we're looking at really what we can do with that whole corner, and if that waterfront is in Tidelands is in fact belonging to the city, I just guess I want to toss that out there. A little bigger vision, I guess. Right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Big vision, we like it. Counselor Stuckey.
Mr. Gluth kind of touched on thoughts I had in that it's easy to look at renderings that are very nice and beautiful and get kind of excited about it, and that's good. We want that excitement. But, I've showed you before. I mean, I have beautiful renderings from 2007 that show clock tower and redeveloped downtown, which a lot of people here say we need to redevelop downtown. We're kind of figuring out what that actually means. But, I always see council, just like with affordable housing, our job is to create the right environment with code changes and things of that nature. But we're not going to likely, other than the little parcel we have, be the ones to build these sort of structures, unless I'm wrong. I don't think we have that in the budget. So how do we get partners to do that? Because we can have all the ideas in the world, we can change all these codes, we can do whatever we need to do, but we're not going to be the ones to build it. So how do we get partners on board for things like that to take that step?
Yeah, no, good question. And I don't want to say that I have all the answers or that even everyone in this room has all the answers. It's a very complex process. And just what Councilmember Wiesner brought up, I think we'd have to have at least 6 experts in the room just to even get a somewhat of an answer to your question, to your good thought, because it is complex and highly regulatory and expensive. I'm just going to give you a couple examples, and that is such an exciting question. I think we could all chew on that for like an hour easily tonight, and that's not the intent of tonight. There was a study done for your transportation benefit district in 2018, and in that it assumed a certain cost per square foot, or per square yard, I should say, to pave your roads, to preserve your roads. Oil prices have generally, they do this, but they generally are the same as they were back in 2018. So imagine, I'm going to simplify this sort, but imagine no change in your basic material that you need, oil, that's stayed the same, but those costs have gone up 200%. So your actual value of what you can do with your transportation benefit district has gone down somewhere between 30 and 40% in real terms. So imagine if Mr. Goldman brought you a budget that said our revenues have gone down 30 to 40% in 6 years. The place would come unglued. You'd have to make horrible choices. But in real terms, that is what is happening. So I think the key thing, and we all are listening to someone go bleep. Okay, thank you, Tim. The key thing is that this is a massively changing environment. Property values, what it costs for you to even build a house in Oak Harbor, whoever you are, whatever your thoughts are, to go plat a piece of land, put in the infrastructure, put in the additional regulatory stormwater rules, right? And then deliver that to the citizen. What is that? Whatever, if you were assuming something from 2-3 years ago, you're already way off. And by the end of this year, you're going to be way off, possibly. Maybe things are going to slow down. Right? So it's a very quick moving environment. So we want to set ourselves up to build a community that is going to be really exciting 10, 20, 30 years from now. Because as Mr. Wright mentioned, this isn't something that happens quickly overnight, even in the places. So we've gone to downtown Bellingham. We went to Fairhaven. We went to the places that have that village feel. We went to downtown Bothell, downtown Woodinville. Places that have put this together. It took them a lot of time, and nothing happened for 20 years while they built this plan. So part of our role, I'll end with this, part of our role as the government is to set the playing field and to give all the landowners and the property owners a clear vision. And then you're right, over time, each of them are going to make their own independent decision of when that happens, how it happens, and the most controversial is what color the front of the building will be, right? Which may not even be part of our code. Maybe you get to pick your color yourself, right? But everything else is prescribed. So that is what we really want to do, is set that. And here's the fun, exciting part of moving forward and what these workshops are going to be so exciting. And again, the Centers for Creative Land Recycling is such a tremendous partner. And they've done this all over. I know I ask Norman where he is when I check in with him, and it's usually somewhere all over the place, right? So they're doing this. They know what it's like to do this all over this country in different places. I think from Alaska to Hawaii, if I'm right. Yeah, even Alaska. So that is what we need to do. We're imagining we're not trying to rebuild 1980, right? And imagine what it used to be like. We're trying to imagine what is going to be the future when land prices possibly, we don't know, will be even more expensive. Your car will not just have third level of autonomy, but it'll be, in essence, fully autonomous. The next generation may not even buy a car. They will just get picked up by an autonomous taxi. Again, all these things are crazy, wild ideas. No, they're not. They're going on right now. So Waymo, which is owned by Google, and therefore they're very well financed, and put in another $5 billion. They drove 1 million miles of autonomous miles between 2009 and 2023. 1 million miles in a fully autonomous vehicle with no driver in it, except for maybe a safety person at the beginning. Just this last year, I think they drove 4 million miles. So 1 million miles over however many years that were to just 4 million this last year. It is a very complex world that we are going to have to, here in our community, figure out what that means for that next generation. So, thank you.
And then my second question is, through this process, because we got a piece of property, a very prime piece of property, with a lot of ideas on what it could be used for. Through this process, is that list of ideas going to be narrowed down to more exacting what we can do with that piece, or what we should do with that piece of property?
Yeah, very good question. And so, you're right. So I think the next steps, I'm going to be very brief on this, but the next steps, we're going to have these public workshops. We're going to use the wonderful services here. We're going to get the public's input. We're going to get this economic analysis. Then the key hard part is we are going to finish this 2025 comp plan with the county. Got that on your plate this year. And then we really need to work on those code changes and get that done. And again, I would tell you from a government standpoint, you really need to hurry, which means it'll take you 1.5 years, right? That is fast, isn't it? So, so now we're already into 2026, right? That we're talking. And then at some stage, I'll work with Sabrina, I'll work with you, work with Mayor Wright, and we'll decide to do a request for proposals and ask private developers to come join us and partner with us to develop that piece of property. It's a little too early to do that now, because they'd say, well, what are the rules? We'd say, well, we're working on it. So at some point in this process, we want to do an RFP and get a professional developer to come meet with us. And then part of their work is they will, in essence, we won't make them pay for that property right away, because in essence, they're going to sit down with us and we will formulate agreement, and maybe we can even get down to the color of the siding. You know what I mean? That's how that process will work itself out.
Councilor Merrill.
Director Schuler, Mr. Wright, thank you very much for such exact professional presentation, not too complex, but still useful. And I would point out, in echoing the citizen who mentioned about parking, I mean, we're decades away from the structure of transportation, of which we're talking about autonomous vehicles and everything, but we have events and all of the rest. So the matter of parking is not insignificant. It's substantial. But again, the idea of having somewhat distant parking for the events and then having a shuttle, I mean, these concepts work because you don't want to tie up all your highest value real estate with parking spaces. I mean, I understand the need for it though, but you don't want to dismiss that. And then with respect to the affordability option or the question, any city that wants to develop and grow and be vital, they've got to have a net income coming in. They have to have net revenues coming in. I can tell you right now, the studies show that we have money just going out. All these $300 million or whatever it is from the Navy base, there's a large fraction of it that just rolls off the island. So what the main thing is that we need to make sure that what we produce on the waterfront is going to draw people with large disposable incomes or discretionary incomes, so that this is a to-go place. And was it Leavenworth? I mean, people come from all over the world to go to a place that was never designed to be Bavarian, but they go there to see Bavarian. And so this is the kind of thing that we need to keep in mind about the waterfront, because that's prime real estate. And so the matter of affordability, we may be talking about back away from the waterfront. And then with respect to the owners, it's very enticing to think we can, by code and by persuasion, get owners to go get buy-in with a plan. But my experience with the Main Street Association is that does not exactly work. And so it's a generational thing, decades to get things to work. And of course, the code changes can make a difference too. Let's see. So also one thing I was thinking too is, even though a grand plan, is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's an incremental process. And so we might have something like a Hilton. I mean, this is getting off it's getting out the starting blocks, so to speak, the Hilton that is potentially being planned there. Well, that's an incremental step. But a fully integrated waterfront with the design that is all tied together, I mean, that requires a tremendous coordination among all the stakeholders and landowners and everybody. And that I'd be just blunt, is quite a stretch if you've got existing landowners and structures, even like the Hilton, right? Are they going to buy into all this? I mean, so I would just say that it's good to have a vision, but there are incremental parts to it, and I would close with that.
Thank you, Councilor Merrill. Any other council questions, comments, feedback? Councilor Wittgenstein, are you still with us?
Yes and no comment, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to my next question. No, sorry. If you want to email us your question or comment or something, we can get back to you, though. Trying to figure out how to phrase this. I'll just blatantly plagiarize. We had a meeting, I guess it was several months ago now, with the county planning department and Commissioner Jill Johnson representing Oak Harbor, and she said something that really hit me hard, and I've been thinking about it ever since, because she said it in a way that I had not thought of it. And from her perspective, working with the rest of the county and Oak Harbor being the city, I grew up here. I think of Oak Harbor as a small town. We're a quaint little small town, and that's who we are. And we like it that way. And, your big picture with the star map and the light map emphasizing why, infill is so important, because those dark spaces, we don't want to pollute those with more light. And so the thing that Jill said was that from the perspective of the rest of the county, we are the urban center of the county. We are the big city in the area. We are Everett and they are Monroe or Skycomish or something. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was like, we're not Everett. I don't want to be Everett. That's not who we are. And yet it was a really great kind of visual exercise, because when it comes to things like housing allocation and preparing for growth, because we are already the developed part of the county, a lot of that is going to get shoved on us, whether we like it or not. And so I can internally protest about not wanting to feel like Everett all day long. The reality is we are the only city, and a lot of any future development and or commerce is going to have to take place within our city limits. And so the challenge that we as council and as planners and city administration faces is, how do we accommodate that growth? How do we accept the reality that we're going to have to accommodate this while not sacrificing our identity? And so that is the thing, just, I'm thinking out loud, that is what's rattling around in the back of my mind whenever we're having these development conversations, is how do we keep our small town feel, because I'm sorry, I don't remember who made the comment, but that's why people moved to the island. That's why they live in Oak Harbor. They like, I think it was Mr. Gluth. They like the way it feels, and so urbanizing that to too far an extent, it removes some of the appeal, and then we lose our identity. And I really appreciated, Mr. Wright, the renderings, the visual renderings. I mean, my heart literally swelled when I saw the first one, because when I picture that corner down there at Bayshore and Pioneer, that's kind of what's in my head, and it's so hard to articulate a vision, and you did that, and it's really helpful to have a starting point. We don't have to commit to anything. We just throwing it out there. How do we feel? It's easy to look at some examples and some options and say, well, we like this, we don't like that, versus just giving us a blank parcel and saying, hey, what do you want to do with it? That gets us nowhere, as we've seen, as history has shown. So thank you for the visuals. The Navy jets were a nice touch. This is very much kind of the quaint Oak Harbor future that I know that I see in my head. I would like us to keep in mind things like view corridors and, the things that connect us to the waterfront, which is so integral to who we are. The rooftops, I'm thinking that, any flat rooftop is a waste of horizontal space. Why can't, I spent my early childhood in Japan, and all their rooftops had gardens or restaurants or amusement parks, or because horizontal space is at such a premium that there's no such thing as any unused bit of space. And so I look at those big flat roofs like Walmart, and I think, God, what could we, even if we just planted something, it could just be something visually appealing. And if you're thinking literally 20, 40, 60, 100 years into the future, then that's one of those things that needs to be considered. So I'm just kind of throwing all of this out there for the sake of reflection and conversation, because there's so many ingredients in this recipe that it's really easy to lose sight of some of them. And so the more points of view and perspectives and ideas that we have, we can do our best to cover all of our bases and complete that vision. Because what we don't want is just unchecked, unplanned growth, because then it's just this hodgepodge, and it's not, I think Councilor Mero used the word integrated, and I think that was a great word. And so however realistic that may or may not be, I think that is probably a worthy goal, maybe is the word. Anyway, that's me thinking out loud. Thank you for all of your patience, and please, by all means, keep the feedback and the input coming, because I know there are 6,000 things I've not thought of, and really trying to keep an eye on the big picture. So thank you, Mr. Schuler, especially for allowing us to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, after that diatribe, any further council comments, questions? Okay, so we will see you again at a workshop, and Mr. Wright
Yeah,
as
hope to
well.
see you at our first public workshop that'll be coming up, I know, in February. We'll get that date finalized and get that out.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, Brad, I'll be in touch between now and then. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, let's take a recess. Let's do 5 minutes. We'll be back at 7:55. Everybody can stretch their legs, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.